Okay. Well, hello everybody. Welcome back. I'm sorry. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a while since last time we did a live stream here on the channel. And so thank you guys so much for tuning in. I just wanted to mention a couple of things before we do get started. First one is we did reach our benchmark of 100 subscribers. So thank you guys so much for the support on that. And for those of you that have been following the channel over the last pretty much couple of months, I mentioned to you guys that if we hit 100 subscribers, then I would shave my hair on live stream, and that hair, or whatever is left on my head, would be donated to the St. Baldrick's Foundation. And that's for kids with pediatric cancer who have lost their hair during their fight or throughout their fight of pediatric cancer. Just as a disclaimer too, I mean, even if we didn't hit the 100 subscribers, I would have more than likely still donated money. It's not like it was either get me to 100 or I just don't do anything at all for charity. That's not the case. It was just more of a incentivized way of, raising money, which is seeing me without any hair. And so that's exactly what we're going to do. Now, I do have a date in mind, and I actually had it scheduled. They have it on the website to where you actually schedule like when you're going to do the head shaving or the fundraiser, and it can be done virtually. So that is what I'm going to do. I just have to figure out what date it was. I'm pretty sure it's like in February. So I'll have to just double check. But we will be doing a live stream, and my head will be shaven. So I will live up to my word. My word is my bond, and I will definitely do it, and it's for a great cause. Look out for the St. Baldrick's Foundation link here in the coming weeks, because I am going to start posting that, and I may even have some other YouTubers participate and try to help me raise money. So as soon as I get that link posted, I will be sure to post that on the socials, the Facebook, the YouTube channel, and then hopefully we should get as many people as possible to donate, because it's for a wonderful cause. Again, I will be doing a live stream at some point in the next few weeks, probably towards February, where I will be shaving my head or having my head shaven, and whatever is from my head will be donated to the St. Baldrick's Foundation for kids suffering from pediatric cancer. So, great cause, but again, thank you guys so much for 100 subscribers. Really do appreciate it. And cheers to growing our community here over the next, and I guess in the years to come. So we have a bit to talk about tonight. I mean, we haven't talked in the last couple of weeks, and there's, I guess, quite a bit to talk about. And what I want this discussion to be tonight is for you guys to have the opportunity to ask any questions that you have. All right. So if there's anything that comes to mind or anything you want me to go over, if it's even revolving around your local area, I would be happy to talk about it. So please feel free to post your questions down in the comments below if you're watching us live as we speak. If you're also watching this video once it was live and more on the archive side, you can also post comments continuously asking questions. So even if you're not here while it's live, post some questions, right? If you're watching the video and it's New Year's Eve and you're watching this, post your questions down below and I'll be happy to respond to them in the YouTube comments. But let's talk a bit about what's going on with our weather pattern, shall we? So this website and a lot of the sources that we pull from today are free sources. So you guys can actually pull from this yourselves. And I think you'll find that the websites and the sources we pull from are pretty useful. As long as we can sort of differentiate and pull from some really good sources here and be able to figure out what we should really be looking at as far as our models are concerned, as well as our observations. So let's start first with the GOES 16 satellite. And what I just put on for you guys is the 500 millibar RAP analysis. So this is showing our current jet stream at the moment. The first thing that really pops out at the page is we have quite a bit of convection out towards the Pacific Northwest. It might be somewhat hard to see considering the fact that that screen is pretty damn covered. But we have quite a bit of precipitation. If you're talking about higher elevations near Seattle, Tacoma, we're seeing some snowfall this evening. We're also seeing rainfall mostly in some of those lower elevations by, Portland and San Francisco, Northern California, even into the Central Valley. And that's going to be precipitous here over the weekend as this troughing feature and this area of low pressure continues to move off towards the northeast. So again, we're going to be seeing a pretty precipitous period for the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast. If we look a little bit more downstream of that, we do have this positively tilted area of high pressure, what we call an upper level ridge, that's encompassing the Central Plains, the Missouri Valley, all the way back into the Red River Valley of Texas. For those of you that live in Texas and Oklahoma, I mean, you're not shy from high pressure because you were dealing with that throughout most of this summer. Well, this time we're not really seeing really hot temperatures with this ridging. It's just mostly stable and slightly above average temperature-wise. But one thing to note, you see this little divot here in your jet stream? That is what we call a Alberta clipper. If you're from Chicago, we also call it a Saskatchewan screamer. I tend to stick with Alberta clipper. Saskatchewan screamer sounds very disturbing. So I tend to just call them Alberta clippers and keep it simple. But this is essentially a weak disturbance. This little divot you see in the jet is associated with a weaker low pressure system that's currently over Manitoba. And as we'll see in the models here later on during our discussion, that's going to move off towards the south, and that's going to bring some snowfall for places like St. Paul, Minneapolis, for northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, as well as the lower Great Lakes. And hey, we could even see some lake effect snowfall out towards northwest Indiana by the time we get to the New Year's Day. So there's plenty to talk about that will be impacting travel, and that's going to be this Alberta clipper. And you'll see that a little bit more in detail once we look at those models here momentarily. But I at least want to set the scene and tell you guys sort of where we're at right now with our pattern. So again, that is our Alberta clipper out towards Manitoba. And again, that's going to continue to move off towards the southeast, and it will bring a burst of snow. And I must also preface by saying this. Alberta clippers typically form when they round the base of an upper level ridge. So here is our ridge of high pressure, right, across the west and the Rockies there. And our clippers tend to form, shocker, in Alberta, and then they tend to dive south and east. Now these systems, as we'll see later on, are typically very moisture starved. So they're not a system that's going to bring a crap ton of snowfall, right? And again, we'll really break this down here during tonight's discussion. But we are going to see at least some form of snowfall or some measurable snowfall within this corridor of the lower Great Lakes in the Midwest. So more on that here later on in the discussion. And then finally, we have what was the remains of our system that dumped a crap ton of snowfall in Nebraska as well as Kansas just a few days ago. That is now in the process of decaying and essentially merging into this jet flow. Meanwhile, out towards the eastern Great Lakes, you see this fine little boundary here. That's actually a cold front, believe it or not. And that's continuing to sag south and is going to eventually advect over Lake Ontario and Lake Erie by the time we get to later on tonight into tomorrow morning. Now, what that's going to do, that's going to bring some snowfall for places like Rochester, Buffalo, even back towards Erie, Pennsylvania. But don't expect really high amounts of snowfall with this either. Believe it or not, this is also a secondary clipper system. So clipper system number 1, clipper system number 2, both of these are going to bring snowfall to places like the eastern Great Lakes and even the lower Great Lakes. But pump your brakes, we're not going to be seeing really high amounts of snowfall because, as we just established here and foreshadowed, these systems are going to be weaker disturbances. We're not talking about major snowstorms out of these things. So let's dive deeper. And I just realized I just drew a smiley face. My God. I drew a smiley face, and it has a nose. So there you go. I just inadvertently drew a face on a weather map. That's amazing. I'm an artist all of a sudden. Oh, by the way, speaking of being an artist, fun fact, guys, I was told in, third grade? I was told in third grade that I draw like a kindergartner. I never wanted to be an artist after that point. I actually was going to be a video game designer before I wanted to become a meteorologist, and yeah, that totally dashed my dreams right then and there. So, fun fact about me, I can't draw for the life of me. I am complete crap when it comes to art. Anyway, let's dive deep into the models here and show you sort of what we're talking about, right? So I'm going to look here at the NAM 3K, just sort of the short term here. And by the way, as I mentioned, if you have any questions during this discussion, post those down in the comments below, all right? Feel free to do so. So let's take a look here. Here's Clipper system number 1. There's your cold front that we talked about. That's going to continue to advect southward over time, and especially once we go through tonight. As that passes through, hey, look at that. We get a bunch of transitions from rain to snow all along the eastern Great Lakes. As I mentioned, because this is sort of a frontal boundary, not expecting to see really copious amounts of snowfall accumulation. It's going to be mostly minor. And I would even make the argument that for a broad stretch, and we'll also look at some snowfall totals here in a second, really kind of a broad range of about 1 to 3 inches of snowfall for the eastern Great Lakes. So, not too crazy, right? It's still going to have some impacts. I mean, there's going to be quite a few people on the roads as we get into your New Year's, and especially Saturday morning. But, keep in mind, it's going to be minor in terms of accumulation. So that's Clipper system number 1. That's going to continue to move off to the south with that cold front. If anything, we're going to see more of a consistent snowfall once again up towards New Hampshire and Maine. Why? Because we have, remember that low pressure that's decaying and becoming a part of our jet stream? Well, that's going to sort of move across east, and that's going to provide some troughing and some sort of more broad instability to produce, well, broad snowfall. And so we are expecting places like New Hampshire and Maine to get more of that copious snowfall as opposed to, say, the eastern Great Lakes. But some of that snow is going to stick around, especially for the interior, especially towards the Appalachians, the mid-Atlantic. Could see some snowfall, especially at higher elevations, continuing with that backed flow. The NAM really picks it up very well. And then take a look at this. This is Clipper system number 2, right? And notice how you can actually even see the spin on our model output. So that's going to continue to dive south. And then, as you notice here on the NAM, you actually end up getting even some single-banded lake effect snowfall out towards northwest Indiana on the back side. So that's definitely going to also bring down some minor accumulations. And eventually it's going to swing east for the same areas that saw Clipper system number 1. Well, eventually you're going to see Clipper system number 2, and you're going to see some snowfall there as well. So kind of a double dose of snow if you live near the eastern Great Lakes, and first batch of snowfall in a while for you that live in the lower Great Lakes and even the upper Midwest. So what I would like to do tonight, we sort of talked about here the two systems themselves. I guess what I would like to do as well is show you a sounding. This is something that is really uncommon, especially on the weather YouTube universe, to dive into a weather sounding. But what I would like to do is show you an example of one just to really demonstrate the overall vertical profile of our atmosphere when it comes down to these two systems. So let's do that. We're going to head on over to our soundings here on WeatherBELL, and I'm going to pull up the NAM once again, just for the sake of an example. And you know what? Actually, I lied. Let's actually do the European deterministic. And we're going to focus here on Gary, but as I say that, I think I would rather want to do O'Hare. So we'll go to O'Hare. And so we're expecting to see that Alberta Clipper move through the Chicagoland region and really the lower Great Lakes around what would be Sunday evening. So if we move this ahead to Sunday evening, well, we can, without even looking at a weather model, really diagnose what's happening with our snowfall. So if we take a look here, this is as of 21Z on Sunday, and this is around 3 o'clock. So right around the late afternoon, early evening hours of Sunday. So for those of you that have never seen a SKU-T before, this is a wonderful tool in forecasting. A lot of times with radar output, whenever we look at the NAM or the HER or the GFS, sometimes, I mean, you have to really look under the hood to see what's going on, right? I mean, you could see that there's going to be snow, but if you're trying to figure out what kind of dendrites we could see, what kind of snowflakes we could see, how heavy the snowfall is going to be, how saturated our environment's going to be. In this case, we want to look at a SKU-T because that's going to give us more information under the hood. So we're going to pull from a couple examples here tonight. This is from Clipper System number 2 that moves through the lower Great Lakes by the time we get to Sunday. So this is out of Chicago. We're looking at the European model. Down below here on your x-axis is going to be your temperature in Celsius. Remember, in Celsius, 0 is our freezing. Up towards the y-axis, we have our pressure, and we use pressure as a reference frame for height. So if we think about it in terms of height, say 800 millibars, we're really talking about a kilometer or 2 off the ground. Around 500 millibars, we're looking at more about 3 to 5 kilometers off the ground. And then by the time you get to 200, you suspected it, 12 kilometers above ground level. So essentially what this SKU-T does for us in forecasting is it gives us sort of an under-the-hood look at what we're seeing with our overall setup from the ground level all the way up, right? So a couple things to note. This is when we're seeing snowfall by the time we get to Sunday afternoon. Well, a couple of things to note. Our green line is our dew point. Our red line is our temperature. Over on the right-hand side is our wind barbs, and the more lines you see, the stronger the winds it's demarcating. And as you can see, based on our winds with height, we have some north-northwesterly winds at the surface, and then it becomes northerly with height. So that is what all of this is demarcating here. So let's take a look now that I've given you some background knowledge, and as my dog gets excited about seeing a SKU-T. Let's take a look, right? So notice how we see our green and red that are on top of each other, between about a kilometer and 2 off the ground. Well, what that means is that our vertical column, right, we have saturation. When your dew point and your temperature are equal, then that's when we see saturation, and that's when we see precipitation. Now, what's also important is that we have to look at temperature too. So if we want snowfall, we need to have this saturation taking place between about -10 to -20 degrees Celsius. Do we have that? Yes, we do. And it actually takes place here around 2 to 3 kilometers. So right in this area is where we're expecting to see dendritic growth, what we call the dendritic growth zone. So this is the area where we see snowflakes developing. Why? Because our air is saturated, and it's also between 10 to -20 degrees Celsius. That is the sweet spot if we're trying to get snowflake development. So that takes place just above the surface. We have saturation all the way down to about a half a kilometer off the ground. But notice that once we get towards the surface, our dew point and our temperature go in opposite directions. So what that tells us is that while we're saturated above the surface, we're actually not as saturated below. And that's a concept that we call dry air intrusion, meaning that there's dry air near the surface and the boundary layer. So that's important, and it's critical to the forecast because we don't just have dry air in the boundary layer right in this area near the surface, but we also have some dry air even aloft in the mid-levels of our troposphere. And that's important because if we're dealing with dry air both above and below this dendritic growth zone that we established, then we're not going to be seeing this really heavy snowfall, right? And it's not going to be big flakes either because, well, quite frankly, we're not as saturated, and our precipitable water, which we'll talk about here in a moment, is also relatively low. So in this case, when I'm trying to forecast for Chicago, which again, for those of you tuning in right now, we're talking about the Clipper system impacting the Midwest here to start on a SKU-T, we're really talking about a system where we got some dry air to work with. And that's important because as this snowflake falls, think about a snowflake falling to the ground. As soon as it encounters that dry air towards the surface, it's going to get choked out. And so we're not going to see this really heavy, intense snowfall. Instead, it's going to be rather light. Also, the snowflake itself is going to be sort of wet and sticky. And how do we know that? Because at the surface, our temperature is at and slightly below 32. Although our SKU-T is showing it being slightly above, at some point within this timeline, it does dip below, as you can see right here. So here's what we can diagnose for this Clipper system number 1 for Chicago, right? We can establish the fact that we're going to see snow. We have a dendritic growth zone. It's developing dendrites. But we also have this dry air that exists in the mid-levels and in the low levels. And so in that case, what that results in is it's going to be a sticking snow. Because of our temperature, it's not too cold at the surface. It's right around 32. And secondly, the snowfall rate itself is going to be rather light. The other way we know that, I sort of alluded to it here in our discussion, is what's called precipitable water. Precipitable water, if we want some really heavy snowfall, typically you would want some sort of a southerly component, meaning we would want southerly low-level winds to advect some sort of moisture in the boundary layer. We're not seeing that here. Notice how our winds are all out of the north, from the surface all the way up to about 12 kilometers high. That tells us that overall, we're not seeing much moisture advection. And that's to be expected with the clipper systems. You see, these systems don't typically have a lot of moisture with them. So to see a precipitable water value of 0.35 inches tells us that we're going to be seeing not a lot of moisture advection with this, meaning we're not going to be seeing some heavy, intense snowfall. This is going to be rather light, could be reducing visibilities at times, the afternoon into the evening for portions of the lower Great Lakes, but it's not going to be a major snow event. It's just going to be, some minor accumulations here. So that's the Chicago forecast sounding. I will pull up one more as an example, and then we'll head back to some models. Again, this is a really great exercise because hey, the SKU-T, as somebody who went to school for meteorology, I can tell you that it does wonders if you can master this. And you don't even have to have a meteorology degree to learn this. There's a lot of different resources you can pull from that could make you better forecasters. But the SKU-T really tells a lot more information than what you can get on a typical, reflectivity map that shows snowfall and rain. So let's bounce around a little bit. We'll go to Rochester, shall we? That's another area that's going to be getting snowfall here, and that's going to be with their own clipper system starting tonight. So we'll go to the Greater Rochester International Airport. And by the way, guys, for those of you tuning in, thank you so much for doing so. Post those comments down below if you have any questions or any thoughts. We'd love to hear them. And if you have any questions about your local area for the forecast, feel free to post those. I will be happy to cover your area, no problem at all. So let's take a look here at Saturday. This takes us into early Saturday morning. And hey guys, look at this. Big difference for Rochester, right? Remember how we were talking about for Chicago, more of that dry air towards the surface? We're not seeing that here. We have a pretty saturated profile based on our SKU-T. We notice here that our temperature and dew point is pretty much on top of each other. And we do have still this northerly component here at the surface. Now, notice though that in comparison to the Chicago clipper system, that this is actually pretty similar, right? So we do have, I guess slightly more uniform saturation, but we have a little bit more drier aloft as opposed to the surface. That's the only difference, right? So remember how our Chicago sounding, we had our dew point and our temperature sort of veering off in different directions. We don't really have that here, right? So instead, we're actually having green and red on top of each other, basically from the surface aloft. Notice that our temperatures are still slightly above freezing. So a place like Rochester will probably be seeing rain early on in the morning before it does switch over to snow. But it is relatively more so saturated. We're not seeing much dry air at the surface. And the reason for that is likely because we are seeing more of a lake effect component to it. And that's a whole different animal when we talk about forecasting. So if we go forward in time to where we do see snowfall, you notice that by the time we get to, say, later on in the afternoon, well, we're still slightly above freezing, right? So this may not be the best sounding if we're trying to forecast for snowfall, but we do expect most of the snowfall to be to the south of Syracuse, Rochester. So these are just kind of a few examples of some soundings, and we'll try to go through more of these the more we do some of our live streams. But, they are very helpful, and there are really great resources out there that can help you learn them. Again, you don't have to have a meteorology degree to really look at these, right? So let's head on back to our models here. I know we love them. We love our weather models because they tell us so much. And let's kind of take a look here at reflectivity. We'll go by region based on the short-term, guidance, and this is just looking at the NAM here. Again, we've been talking about it through most of this conversation. A broad cold front's going to move through the eastern Great Lakes, northern New England, upstate New York by the time we get to later on tonight and into tomorrow morning. That is going to move over the lake, and then by that point in time, once we get to the early morning hours, we then see that transition from rain to snow taking place, especially towards the Finger Lakes and all the way back through Syracuse. If you're wondering about the areas that I think are going to be the most impacted, it's certainly going to be those that are along the I-90 corridor, especially all the way as we get into northern New England by the time early next week rolls around for your new year. And then going beyond that point, you see most of that heavy snowfall then kicking in for Massachusetts as well as Vermont and New Hampshire. And again, I mean, if we're talking about the most snowfall here, definitely thinking that Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, these guys are going to be getting some of the most snowfall out of all of this because we get more of that banded snowfall to form. So definitely keeping a lookout for that. And even some snowfall out towards central Massachusetts as well. But by the time we get to Saturday afternoon, going to see mostly rain out of that. Also, keep in mind that beyond Saturday evening, you're seeing some lake effect snowfall out towards Syracuse and even portions of that I-90 corridor we've been talking about. So we're going to be seeing some single banded snowfall. Because remember, we're seeing this northwesterly wind being advected over the lake. So it is of no surprise, and don't be surprised, especially near anywhere between Rochester, Syracuse, to see some of this lake effect snowfall lingering into Sunday morning and afternoon, according to the NAM. We also have a similar situation going on here for northern New Hampshire. Notice how we have some flakes sort of initiating here, and that's because we have that west-northwesterly flow being advected over the mountains. So two different processes happening here Sunday to continue our snow machine. First one's going to be the lake effect snowfall kicking in for Sunday, and then also snowfall kicking in for the higher elevations of New England when we factor in the orography or the higher elevational component. We also have some lake effect snowfall back towards Buffalo as an honorable mention during this period. So Saturday and Sunday, if you live near Buffalo and Rochester, all the way up to northern New England, certainly going to be seeing some measurable accumulating snowfall then. Certainly want to be on the lookout for that. Let's head on back to the Midwest for system number 2 here in the short term. And then we'll take a look here at the long term as well, because I know a lot of people in the weather universe have been talking about it, and we'll be sure to talk about it here as well. So let's head on back over to the central United States. So that's Clipper system number 1. Here's Clipper system number 2 as that moves through. And look at that, right? It moves rather quickly. You get some sort of counterclockwise spin with our low pressure system that sits over Lake Michigan. That actually helps to advect some lake effect snow banding out towards Gary, Indiana. You see it right here on the run. And the reason why is because when you get enough fetch or enough distance between shore to shore and you have a northwesterly low-level component with our wind, that creates single-banded snowfall. Also, the wind itself is not going to be very strong. It's going to be right in that sweet spot of about 10 to 20 knots to where we get more of that single-banded snow squalling as opposed to multi-banded snow squalls. So some lake effect snowfall once again in the cards for Lake Michigan, and as we talked about here just minutes ago, for the eastern Great Lakes of Erie and Ontario. And also, honorable mention for the Rockies. We do have some snowfall as well going into the weekend, and that's going to be because of westerly flow too. So let's take a look here finally at some snow totals, because I forgot to do that. Silly me. But let's look. So not a surprise. Okay, I know we are looking at the North American model. I mean, there's other different solutions we can look at for this. For the sake of time, we'll look here at just the North American model, and anywhere between about, call it 0.5 to an inch of snowfall for a broad region of the lower Great Lakes and even the upper Great Lakes. This should make a lot of sense because, remember, Clipper systems, as we've talked about, are moisture starved. And also, because they're moisture starved and because we do have some dry air at the surface, not all the dendrites falling to the ground are going to make it to the ground. So a combination of dry air throughout our profile, some moisture starvation within our profile is going to result in our snow totals being rather low. So I take a lot of credence. I know it's kind of sacrilegious to go on one model solution, but when it comes down to forecasting for Alberta Clippers, an amount between, say, 0.5 to 1 with this system based on the parameters is pretty sufficient, and I would agree with that. I will say Clipper systems can be wildcards in that sometimes, and it kind of shows up here on the NAM, see these little blue spots here? That's actually locally higher amounts. That would not be surprising to see anywhere within, this area, right? So anywhere within the lower Great Lakes could see locally higher amounts. So I painted here about 0.5 to 1 inch of snowfall accumulation, but I'm going to write the plus symbol to reflect locally higher amounts. The locally higher amounts, if we do see them, could be around the 2, maybe even 3 inch benchmark, but for the most part, it's going to be some pretty minor accumulations across much of the region. If we head on over to the northeast, and before we do, I just want to mention as a reminder, this Clipper system that we're talking about here is actually, this is going to be more so for the Saturday night and the Sunday night time frame. So that's really where we derive that swath of snow. So anytime between Saturday night to Sunday night is when we're going to see that. And so definitely want to be on the lookout for that. Also, if you're driving during the period of Saturday night, Sunday night, we may not see winter weather advisories on this. It might be more of a special weather statement. So please, please, please drive with caution, okay? There's going to be a lot of people out on the road. It's going to be New Year's Eve, and it's going to be snowing. So please make sure you're a car distance length away from other cars. I'm not the best driver either. I know I should be it's kind of hypocritical for me to tell people how to drive, but I've seen so many accidents happen from these kind of systems. So please be careful driving on New Year's Eve. And for our other system out towards the northeast, let's not forget about that guy. A little bit of a different situation, right? Some higher snowfall totals here, and a little bit more of a different setup too, because as we've talked about, this is more so of a cold front component that's advecting over the lake. So wouldn't be shocking to see higher snowfall totals. In this case, we're forecasting for anywhere between, say, 1 to 3 inches of snowfall for the greater New York area. Of course, just like with any Clipper system, same thing applies. We could see some locally higher amounts possible. It's very common to see that. Would not be a surprise. And of course, we see the higher snowfall totals in some of the areas where snowfall is much more stratiform and consolidated, and that's towards Maine, and even higher snowfall totals out towards Vermont and New Hampshire at some of those higher elevations where, at several thousand feet, we could be talking about some snow totals, depending on how high you go, anywhere between, say, 7 to 12 inches. So right around just under a foot, we're suspecting with that system. So that's what's really in the short term, and I forgot to mention too, the Mid-Atlantic, and especially by the Appalachians in the interior, also could be seeing some significant snowfall as well. That is especially true at higher elevations as we get this west and this west-northwesterly component of cold air advection. So let's look ahead. Let's look ahead to what is the long term of forecasting here. And I just want to preface because, look, I have seen this all over Weather YouTube, and I see a lot of times people posting jet streams that are 200-300 hours out, and I understand why they do it, because it's meant to go over hypothetical scenarios and just talk about what the models are showing right now as a whole. I'm going to do that tonight, but there's a reason for my madness as to why I'm showing you. It's not because I'm taking full credence into the forecast itself. It's just to show you why we shouldn't put enough or a lot of our chips in the table when it comes down to really solidifying a forecast 200-300 hours out. I know a lot of folks in the weather community have been talking about the concept of stratospheric warming, which is certainly plausible. It's happening, and it's likely to happen. But to then make the leap and say, we're going to see a snowstorm in the Northeast in 200 hours, just not something that I typically like to do, because a lot of times with our models that go really far out, they tend to make assumptions on things that have not yet formed. So I try to avoid that. But for the sake of conversation, let me just show you what we got going on This is the GFS ensemble, taking a look here at our jet stream over the next couple of weeks. Anywhere you see blues is really areas of, call it low pressure, just simplistic terms. Anywhere you see red or this bulge here, that's where we're talking about more ridging or areas of high pressure. So, that being said, as we go forward in time, we do have this continuous flow or this conveyor belt of systems. So system number 1 moves offshore, here's system number 2, system number 3, system number 4. And remember, these are all sort of being displaced because of an area of high pressure, and those are being, advected further south. And so it's exactly what we're seeing here, right, as we go forward in time, is we see this continuous activity move through the southern United States. We were talking about rainfall for the Gulf Coast and, the Panhandle. Well, we're definitely going to see it. This is certainly not going to be drought conditions. As a matter of fact, if you live in the Gulf, we could be seeing some of that drought eradicated here over the course of the next several weeks if we continue to stay in this trend of activity. That would especially be true because our El Nino tends to favor more jet flow and more of a Pacific flow to where we see increased precipitation activity. So as we go forward, this is going out 100 and 200 hours out. A lot of people are talking about this guy. This would be a huge cold air ejection south. Is it plausible? Could it happen? Yes. Arctic blasts and polar vortexes of all sorts do tend to happen sometimes in January and February. But let's keep in mind something. Around the time period, anything greater than 150 hours out, the models tend to make assumptions on systems that have yet to form. And so it's really anybody's guess as to what will happen on the 10th of January. Honestly, it wouldn't shock me for us to see some periods of colder air, especially if we are talking about some stratospheric warming. But the thing is it going to be this strong? Is the cold air going to be that ample to where we see this big bulging long wave trough that encompasses the lower 48? I don't know. It's really just taking a guess and a shot in the dark at this point. So I try not to do that. I try to stick to at least 5, maybe 7 days when it comes down to identifying jet pattern changes. Anytime we're trying to forecast for snowfall or anything of that sort or any sort of wintry precipitation, I try to stick to around a 48, 72 hour time frame at the earliest. Just because at that point we have more data, right? The systems on land, radiosondes are constantly being launched into the system itself, into the jet pattern. So in that case, I'm a little bit more bullish on forecasting things like snow totals much closer to the event. I tend to be more of a conservative forecaster in that sense. So I show you this because you're probably going to see this all over YouTube for the next 2 weeks if it still shows up. And it might not. We might see this ample trough just basically go away. Or we might see a trough by the time we get to January the 10th, but it won't be as strong as we thought, right? It may be more timid and up towards the upper Midwest as opposed to this far south. We shall see, right? It really it remains to be seen. But what I will tell you guys is that at least my prediction through January and February is that we are going to see colder temperatures, right? We are going to see some more below average temperatures, unlike what we saw in the first half of winter, because we are still dealing with an El Nino. We have a positive PNA. We even have a negative NAO, so we have more troughing out towards this area, right? Which would lead to essentially more cold air displacement further south into the Midwest and then eventually into the Northeast and New England. So let's lastly look here at temperature anomalies, just for the hell of it, for shits and giggles. So we'll go ahead and pull up the 2 meter temperature anomaly. And as you can see, right, look at that. It shows quite a bit of cold air for the West Coast, well below average temperatures. But again, this is very far out. If we go a little bit closer in time, though, you start to see the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic beginning to get colder, right? So we're continuing to see that trend. Midwest still remains above average with their temperatures throughout this period. So expect to see temps 30s, 40s, maybe 50s at some points. But, a return to cold, according to the GEFS and some other ensembles, is plausible beginning towards January 9th and 10th. But, like I said, we'll keep an eye on it. It's still very, very far out. For those of you that are here in the chat, again, thank you so much for tuning in. I will be sticking around here for the next couple minutes. I want to turn this over to you now. So if you have any questions or anything you would like for me to go over tonight, I would be happy to do so. If you would like me to talk more about your area, I'd be happy to do so as well. Just go ahead, like I said, post those questions down in the comments below, and I would be happy to discuss those with you. And like I said, I'll be sticking around here for the next couple of minutes. And I will also mention, too, La Nina and El Nino is... Not La Nina. It's not La Nina. El Nino is weakening. Forgot to mention that during the discussion. So, like I said, I'll be sticking around here for the next couple minutes. If you have any questions, go ahead and post those down in the comments below, and we'll talk about it. We'll definitely be sure to talk about it here. But, yeah, guys, I mean, listen, I will say this. I greatly appreciate all of you for subscribing. We are now at 107 subscribers, and I definitely could not have done it without you guys, so I'm grateful for every single one of you. The fact that we're going into the New Year's with 100 subscribers is really freaking cool. So thank you guys so much for the support. Also, I do want to mention Prestige Weather has a consulting service, so if you are a commercial business out there and you're watching this and you're looking for, consulting for snow removal, landscaping, be sure to check us out, prestigeweather.com. You can also shoot me an email, prestigeweather@gmail.com. But other than that, guys, greatly appreciate y'all tuning in. Gosh, it's been really nice out here in Chicago. For those of you who don't know, I'm from Chicago. It's been really nice. It's been really freaking nice. And I don't know if I'm okay with that. I'm really looking for some snowfall or some colder air. As a matter of fact, before I came on the video today, the live stream, I actually just got done running 2 miles. And that's not to flex, but as I was running, I was like, man, it's really not that cold. For those of you that are runners out there, you do tend to warm up as you run. But even still, it just didn't feel that cold outside. Now, it's going to get cold tonight for my neck of the woods. The lows will be out towards the mid-20s, 26, 27 even. But the cold just hasn't been here. It's been really lackluster. So here's to the second half of the season getting colder. Here's to 2024 actually showing up for winter. But gosh, it's just been rather quiet. And it's going to be quiet for the Midwest. I mean, minus a couple of clipper systems that move through. We're not going to be really seeing, I personally believe, much in the way of a winter storm. But if you live in the Northeast New England, you're certainly not done with winter. I suspect you get at least one nor'easter this year. It's just a matter of when, right? I don't really know. That's such a great question, but I certainly do think that that's going to happen. But guys, the winter has to show up. We got to get winter, especially for the northern half of the United States, because I can't go another day dealing with 40s and 50s. A lot of you out there can. You love your warm temperatures. I totally get that. But I really need to see some cold. I need to see some snow, at least a couple of times. That'll make me happy. I need to see my seasons out here in Chicago. And for a lot of you that have yet to see the 4 seasons take place. It's mostly been spring, summer, spring, and then back to fall. So, it's been kind of a wild roller coaster of a ride. But listen, guys, I want to thank you so much for each and every one of you that tuned in tonight. And for those of you that are watching this video after the fact, post questions, guys. I am here to answer your questions. If you have any questions about your forecast for your local area or a weather question that I can help answer, I will be sure to respond to every single comment. I just need y'all to post those. I need y'all to ask me those questions because I know you guys have them. They're burning questions. Don't be afraid to post those below. I'll be happy to respond to them. Listen, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. This is a wonderful live stream tonight. And if you did enjoy the live stream, be sure to like and subscribe. Share with family and friends who will be impacted by the winter weather. I hope each and every one of you have a safe and happy New Year's. If you live on the Northeast, and especially by the Eastern Great Lakes, if you live near the Lower Great Lakes, please be careful with those clipper systems. They're going to be impacting the New Year's travel. So be very careful. Safe travels, have a happy new year, and we'll see you back here in 2024. Take care.